Hi friends, welcome to GMAT Points video series. In this particular video, we'll be discussing whether the GMAT Focus Edition is harder than as compared to the GMAT OG. What is the level of difficulty? Which sections are difficult? Which sections are easier? We'll just discuss everything in this particular video. So let's get started. So firstly, what is the difference between the old GMAT and the new GMAT? The first major difference that you see is in the quant section. One big topic, which is geometry, has been dropped. So because geometry has been dropped, the number of formulas that you have to essentially remember has gone down. For arithmetic, there are a few set of formulas. For algebra also, there are a few formulas. Word problems are based on these two. So again, the number of formulas, I would say, has more than halved as such. So level of difficulty in terms of preparation of formulas, preparation of concepts and formulas has definitely gone down. You do not require as much preparation of concepts as such. So you do not need to spend a lot of time preparing concepts. But what has actually gone up in its place? The difficulty of the section has gone up. The difficulty of the questions have gone up. So the concepts are easier, but the questions are harder. They require more practice. So what exactly has happened? The weight given to preparation of concepts has gone down. So conceptual understanding or concept knowledge, that importance has gone down. On the other hand, the importance of practice, of actually solving questions, solving harder questions, has actually gone up. Because if you see the scores also this time, the way people are scoring, the scores in quant for even a lot of students who have appeared for harder exams, the scores in quant have gone down. Why have they gone down? Because the questions are harder. They require you to actually think more. But the conceptual underpinnings of those questions are not harder. In fact, the number of concepts that you have to learn or the formulas that you have to remember is much lesser. But on that smaller base, harder questions are being asked. So here, there is a two-way effort. So the concept time that you have to spend learning concepts has gone down, but the time you have to spend practicing has gone up. So it's a counterbalancing kind of this. So I'd say the level of difficulty in old GMAT and new GMAT is the same, but people are scoring lower because they are not spending enough time practicing questions. When it comes to verbal reasoning, I would say this is definitely one of the sections which has become much easier. Why has this become much easier? Especially for students who are not from English speaking countries, or who are not from where English is not the first language, or sometimes even not the language of instruction. For those people, this is actually an advantage. Why is this an advantage? Because grammar and sentence correction has been taken out. Now, if grammar and sentence correction is taken out, what will happen? The number of rules that you had to remember has been eliminated. Grammar and sentence correction actually required a lot of preparation, lot of additional preparation, because you had to remember, okay, the rules for modifiers is this, the rules for parallelism is this. In fact, I would say that for verbal reasoning section, 90% of the work that you would actually do before taking the exam would be in grammar and sentence correction as such. Now, since all of that work is gone, the time taken for preparation of concepts is much lower. For reading comprehension, you will take some time. For critical reasoning also, you will take some time. But that time is lesser, far lesser than the number of rules you had to remember, even mug up for grammar and sentence correction. So again, the same format we are seeing, the same kind of effect we are seeing. Conceptual knowledge required is lesser. But when the conceptual knowledge required is lesser, the practice goes up. So for the smaller base, if you have to really outdo your peers, you have to be very good at solving questions. So again, the importance of practice has gone up consequently. So what does this mean? That this means that the reading comprehensions will be tougher to read. The passages will not be as easy to read as such, and the questions will require more inferential thinking. At the same time, critical reasoning also, the critical reasoning will require some amount of thinking. There will be some close options also. So essentially, the difficulty of the questions has gone up. The conceptual base required has shrunk. So I would again say this is a huge advantage, especially for students who are either giving GMAT in a few months or who have lesser time to prepare for GMAT. This is a very big advantage as such, because you do not have to spend a whole lot of time covering syllabus. The syllabus has become much lesser. Once geometry and grammar sentence correction have been removed, the syllabus has become much lesser. Again, now earlier you used to have integrated reasoning. All of that along with data sufficiency has now been put into your DI data insight section. This requires conceptual learning. This requires conceptual understanding. So a lot of the time that you're going to be spending now will essentially be in covering this section, because this is an entirely new section. Much of the questions were seen earlier in the integrated reasoning section as such, but here the multi-source reasoning is entirely different. All of this, much of this requires a lot of practice. There isn't any underlying concept as such over here. There is nothing that you have to you have to mug up, or any formula that you have to remember. Conceptual understanding over here basically is an understanding of the type of set. What exactly is this type of set? When you are given with so much information, how do you actually go through that set? How do you prioritize information? When you are answering a question, where do you go looking for that information? How do you read graphs? How do you understand correlation? How do you understand basic statistical correlation as such? All of this conceptual understanding is required, but much of this essentially comes with practice. You cannot actually understand what statistics is or how to solve two-part analysis questions without actually solving questions. So there is essentially a theme over here. You need more practice in the quant section, you need more practice in the VR section, you need much more practice in the DI section. So overall, the difficulty level has gone down, but the need for practice has consequently gone up. So the difficulty remains the same, but the shift has occurred in terms of how much time you should be spending learning concepts versus how much time you should be spending answering questions, practicing questions. Here it is extremely important that you spend a lot of time practicing questions. That is the way you would actually achieve a high score, because the questions are harder, the concepts required are simpler. Arithmetic, like time, speed, distance, time and work, all these concepts are simple as such. The difference is that the questions asked on those same concepts have become harder. Okay, so what is the change in syllabus is simple. It has actually been reduced. The job for you has been made simpler, but now you have to spend more time practicing. So what is the preparation time? So essentially I would say that an ideal preparation time before you actually take the GMAT would be around 2 months to 3 months as such. Now, how do you actually spend these 2 months and 3 months? Okay, I would suggest that it would take you less than 15 days to actually cover the conceptual underpinnings of all concepts. So I would suggest that you proceed in the following way. Start with quantitative reasoning. In quantitative reasoning, cover the arithmetic formulae, arithmetic concepts. Once you start covering the arithmetic concepts, once you have covered them, this should not take you more than 2-3 days. After that, for the remaining 2-3 months, solve around 10 to 20 questions every single day. This will help you quite a bit in improving your arithmetic ability, in improving your score in quantitative reasoning. Quantitative reasoning requires sustained efforts. It does not improve in a single day. It requires daily efforts for a extended period of time. So that's why when I say, when you have 2 months, 3 months, get the concepts done initially, and after that start solving questions more and more. Similarly, after you get your algebra concepts done, this should also take you 2-3 days. Okay, start solving another 10 to 20 questions of algebra every single day. So what is going to happen is that you start solving only 10 questions or 20 questions. After that, you're solving 20 to 40 questions. After that, you're solving 50 to 60 questions every single day. Once you start adding it up, by the end of it, the time spent learning new concepts versus practicing will be like this. This time would be for practice, this is for conceptual learning, and say this is time as such. Okay, so initially, and this is the days as they go past. Okay, initially on day 0, you will be spending a lot of time learning concepts and very little time practicing questions or solving questions. But as time goes by, you have to essentially switch completely to focusing more on practicing questions. Of all the time, if you are spending like 3-4 hours preparing for GMAT, spend most of its time on practice rather than conceptual learning. Okay, so this is for the QR section, how you should actually go about preparing for the QR section. Now let's consider the VR section. I would suggest, before you actually begin with RC, get CR done. In many ways, critical reasoning forms the conceptual underpinnings of reading comprehension. Reading comprehension skills required are not entirely critical reasoning skills, but there is a significant overlap. So if this is RC and this is CR, there is a significant overlap in understanding the strength of the argument, in understanding what the argument being made is, in understanding what would strengthen the argument, what would weaken the argument. If you understand arguments in that way, it becomes easier for you to actually solve RC questions also. So with that, I would suggest that start with critical reasoning. It would help you get the basics right. Once you understand the different types of questions, identifying assumptions, identifying strengthening and weakening arguments, all of that, once you have done that basic understanding of what is being asked, I would suggest start solving again 5 to 10 questions daily. This is important because this is the kind of daily practice that is needed to really do well in GMAT. The next is after you have done completed CR basic understanding, you have started solving questions, do the same with RC. With RC, I would suggest to solve one set every day. One set is a very doable, very achievable target, and if you do that set well properly, if you understand that set, if you analyze the set after you attempt it, I'm sure if you solve one set every day, by the end of the 2-3 months, you'll be definitely set with a very good understanding of how to answer the questions that come in GMAT. So this would be how I would suggest you actually practice for QR and VR. For data insights, how do you prepare for data insights? See, the basic idea is in data insights, there are 4 different types of sets that come plus data sufficiency. Data sufficiency, to answer data sufficiency questions, you will need the base knowledge of arithmetic and algebra. That's why I suggest that you start with data insights after you have completed the quant portion. Because once you have completed the quant portion, you understand time, speed, distance, time and work, all of those things once you are done with, it would become easier for you to actually answer data sufficiency questions. Now in data sufficiency questions, apart from data sufficiency questions, you have the 4 types of data insight sets which come as groups of questions rather than individual questions. Now these kind of questions require a lot of effort, first to read and then to understand the question. The difficulty lies not in the question itself. If you have solved 10 questions of say multi-source reasoning, the 11th one will not be difficult. The difficulty comes from the novelty of the question. These questions are entirely new to most students, so that's why students struggle with it. After some time, I'm sure once the understanding is there how to attempt these questions, once there are sufficient number of questions that you have solved, it will become much easier for you to handle the next question. So in data insights, I would suggest that don't spend a lot of time understanding concepts because there isn't that much understanding of concepts as such, but rather an understanding of the question type. So in these kind of sets, start from solving from day one. From the first day itself, say that I will solve 2 sets of each type every single day or 1 set of each type every single day, and I'll take every weekend or so, I'll start solving the data sufficiency questions. This I feel is the ideal strategy. Start with quant, then with VR and go then to data insights. Focus more on practice, focus less on learning concepts, because here practice is far more important. Practices would be the deciding factor in what you score as such. Okay, now this is for the preparation. Now you'd have to also take some amount of mocks. There are the OG mocks which are available. I would suggest that take 1 OG mock before you actually start anything in a way to gauge where you stand. After that, you can take mocks on the weekends in between. After 2-3 weeks, take 1 mock just to see what progress has been made. The idea is that when you are taking mocks, okay, the first mock I would suggest you take before you start your preparation to just gauge where you stand. Once you have an idea that, okay, I'm at 5:20 or I am at 4:30, once you have a good idea of where you stand, it becomes easier for you to track progress. So I would suggest that always take the OG mocks at the start of your preparation, you get some idea. Now after that, periodically after every 2-3 weeks, take another mock to see what has been the progress made. What are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the areas of concern. I see a lot of students basically take 1 mock at the start and then take 1 mock just before the GMAT exam. That is not good at all. See, between your exams, there should be, between your mock exams and the actual exam, there should be actually sufficient amount of time and preparation so that you're not firstly affected by the mock exam, you're not affected by the score of the mock exam, and secondly, you have a chance to improve on all the weaknesses that were highlighted in your mock exams. Okay, so the idea is that you take a mock exam, you identify, okay, I didn't do well here. Over the next 2-3 weeks, I will work on that to improve. And if you have a regular schedule of like every 2 weeks you're taking a mock, or every 3 weeks you're taking mock, if you stick to the schedule, your preparation also will be much more done much more efficiently, without any gaps or any weaknesses in your preparation as such. So that is the second important thing that you have to remember. Focus more on practice than concepts. Second, take mocks regularly. It is extremely important to gauge where you stand. Okay. Now I'll give you my test taking experience. So I took the GMAT Focus Edition in January and I scored 785 in it. I got a perfect score in quant. I got 2 questions incorrect in verbal reasoning and 2 questions incorrect in data insights. Now basically the first takeaway that I had from the exam is that it is much shorter. Earlier when I gave the GMAT OG, in the highest score that I had ever had in the GMAT OG was 760. So I gave, I think, twice or thrice, and I had 750 twice and 760 once. My basic takeaway from the exam was that it used to be very exhausting, very tiring, very draining at times. Each section was very long, and by the end of it you were very tired. Now in this particular case, I wasn't tired at all. It was like 2 hours 15 minutes. It was much shorter, much less stressful, much less strenuous. And because of that, I felt that if you don't have anxiety for the exam, if you are not very anxious, you can definitely do very well in this exam. Because 2 hours 15 minutes is ample amount of time to actually solve the questions given. The questions given are not very tedious to solve. They do not take that much time. And this, if you feel that it's coming from somebody who is just can go through questions quickly, that is not the case at all. I'm actually a very slow solver. I remember in the GMAT OG section, there was like 62 minutes, 31 questions, and I remember that I had taken so much time for the initial set of questions that I had to rush through the near the end, where I had to actually quickly solve questions under a minute or like under 2 minutes as such, because I had spent too much time in the initial set of questions. Here it was not like that. With the amount of time that you had for quantitative reasoning, you could easily solve each question, think about the question. You had ample time to solve the question, mark the question, and at the end of it, I had 5 minutes to actually review each question as such. And I went to each question. I read the last line of the question to see what exactly was asked. This was something that I would often make a mistake in, where I would solve the question, but something else would be asked at the very end. I would not see that, and I would mark the wrong answer. So I made sure that I revisited every single question, and I checked that what exactly is asked. Yes, this is matching with what I found, so I marked the right question. I checked every single question because there was ample time to do so. So from a slow solver, take my word for it, you have ample time to actually solve the quant questions. The only time when you will feel pressured for time as such is when you get anxious or when you get nervous as such. Then time will pass and you will not be able to actually make progress. So that is the only thing that you have to be very careful of in the quantitative reasoning section. You should not be anxious, you should not be nervous, because that would be a time sink. Otherwise, if you are able to maintain your nerves, there is ample time to actually solve the questions as such. The second thing that I would say is that for the verbal reasoning section, I feel that for the verbal reasoning section, there were options which were closer. There were options which were closer, and there was the ambiguity of answers was more in this particular case than I remember it being. So for reading comprehension, I felt that there were some questions where 2 options were probable. I was confused between the options as such. I would suggest in all such cases, just bookmark it and go review it later. This review later at the end of the section is a godsend for all those people who are not able to commit to a particular answer, especially when there are close options. This basically means that do not spend a lot of time second guessing yourself. Just mark one answer which you feel is the most probable one, and then bookmark it and then review it later on. Maybe after end of the exam, if you see or reread the passage again, you may have better insight into what is being asked. So I would say that in this particular case, make liberal use of the bookmarking facility and reviewing questions later facility. It will make a huge difference, especially in reading comprehensions where the options are very close to each other. In data insights, I felt that data insights, because when I gave the exam, I didn't have a very good understanding of all the different types of sets that would come in data insights. My initial impression of data insights was that it would be heavy in quant as such. The data insights section was not quant heavy at all. There would be some math related sets, but even the math related sets were not calculation intensive. They did not require any kind of extensive calculation. They required basic calculation and more logical reasoning as such. Ability to read tables, ability to read graphs. That is far more important in this section than any quantitative aspect of it. I was particularly surprised by the non-math part of data insights. I was not really prepared for it because there were like string operations. There were questions which were based on essentially logical reasoning puzzles as such. So there is a significant non-math ability that is being checked in the data insights section. You have to be prepared for it. You have to solve a variety of questions, a variety of sets, and only then you will actually get the idea of how to solve these kind of sets. So just remember, this is a shorter exam, but you have ample time. Don't be nervous, and you will have ample time even at the end to review the questions. Use the bookmarking facility liberally. Mark questions which you are not sure about for review later. Here you have the option order for sections. You have greater flexibility in the option order. Based on your personal strengths, order the sections in such a way that you get your strongest sections done first and then go to the weaker sections. The reason for that is I feel that in my own personal case, I did quant first, then I did data insights second, and then finally I did verbal reasoning. The reason why I did that was that I felt verbal reasoning, I might get affected by the ambiguity of some questions. So if you get sometimes stuck between, okay, two options, A and D, you're not very sure of your answer, then that would say, like, just keep playing in your mind later on. Did I mark the correct of the two? So that would in turn impact the remaining section. So I generally don't put the verbal reasoning up front. Quant reasoning, I'm far more confident of my quantitative ability, so I keep that up front. So essentially what I would suggest with the section ordering is, get your top section done first, get the second priority done second, and finally do the third priority. I would suggest against putting the data insights question or data insights sets at the end of the attempt, because it requires a lot of mental concentration and acuity, and if you are actually tired or a bit less than your usual self as such, what will happen is that you will not be able to grasp all this information that is there. So if possible, put it in the middle, because get the quant section done. Once you are warmed up with solving, then go to the data insight section. Do not leave it for the very last, because you might get tired and you might not do well in that section. The data insight section I felt required me most to be on, to be most aware of what is happening, of all the parts or the all the information that is given. So I would say that keep it in the middle once you are warmed up and you are not too tired as such. The last part is that in this particular case, you have the option of sending 5 free score reports. You will get the option at the end of the test, and essentially there are many good positive changes that have taken place from the shift from OG to FE. So those who are on the fence of whether they should take the exam or not, I would suggest taking the exam in the Focus Edition, because it is an excellent exam. It gives you much better understanding of how you have scored. It gives you the extended score reports by default. You do not have to pay extra for it, and it allows you to send scores, 5 free scores as such. So there are many positive changes as I have covered in this particular video. I would strongly suggest that you prepare for this exam over 2-3 months and definitely take it. So thank you for tuning in.